Hi, everybody. It's Carin Andersen with Aortic Hope. And this is my survivor video. It's been a long time since I've actually done this video. I did one when we first came up with this initiative a few years ago, and things were still really fresh and raw. So for those of you who have seen my name or seen me do live events here, I am also a survivor of a type A dissection. And it's interesting now when I tell my story almost 5 years later, I don't really have as much of the minutia and the details in it that I did when I first would tell my story. And I think that that just naturally happens with time. But for me, it was 5 years ago. I was watching TV and just felt a strange pop in my neck. And that was the moment that my life kind of sort of took this huge shift and change. And what I think is interesting when I tell my story now is, like I said, not so much the details, but the message, the lesson, and kind of a little bit more about where I am now. So lesson number one, I did not have excruciating pain. And a lot of people, when they think about having an aortic dissection, they think they're going to have this ripping in half, searing, tearing sensation. And honestly, not everybody feels that way. There are actually some people who really felt little to nothing. I felt pain in the side of my neck, but I'm also a Crohn's disease patient. So to have a pain in my neck or acid reflux is a normal everyday occurrence for me. But this one was different. So this one was different in that I lost the feeling in my arms and my legs briefly. So I guess that's the next lesson, which is when you know your body really well, if you sense something that feels different, that's the first indicator that maybe this is something you should pay attention to. So I did make a call to go to the hospital, which I had never done before for myself. And I walked up into the ambulance and I went to the local medical center, and I'm very lucky that they had my entire medical history in there, and they knew that my father had an abdominal aneurysm, and they listened to my chest and didn't just go off of an EKG, which was perfect, and blood work, which was perfect. They did a CAT scan really right away, and they saw that I was having an ascending dissection, and I had to make the decision where to be transferred to, because this was a medical center and was not an appropriate receiving hospital to perform a life-saving measure. So I left that decision to my husband, and I also made him call my parents, because I'm not going to call my mom and dad to tell them that I'm dying. Who's going to do that? I'll get in trouble or something. So call was made to my parents. Call was made to grab my son, who was 15 at the time, and to meet me at Maryland's shock trauma unit. So only the worst of the worst go to shock trauma. And I knew that this was bad because I remembered the story about John Ritter, and I just assumed I was dying. And it's interesting what happens to a person when you realize that you're in this situation. In my 15 to 20 minute ambulance ride, I put my entire life together. I contacted my son's dad. I contacted my sister, gave her passwords to everything. I contacted my boss and said I wouldn't be coming back into work tomorrow. So it was just very interesting when I look back at all the things that I accomplished in that short period of time. And then there was more to accomplish. So at the hospital, there was the goodbye conversation I had to have with my son, which I think is the hardest part of all of this to still wrap my brain around 5 years later. So I ended up having open heart surgery, which I don't even think I fathomed. I knew I was going to be on a breathing machine, but I don't think I really understood the gravity of what was about to happen. I had 4 bowel resections at that point, so I was a professional when it comes to handling the recovery and the surgery of an abdomen. I had no idea what this was lying ahead of me. My surgery only lasted about 5 hours, no complications during surgery. I was really very lucky. My surgeon, Brad Taylor, was amazing. He paid attention really well in class, and I benefited from that, and was sent home 5 days later. I didn't even have a step-down unit. And that was the next lesson, which is, if I had known then what I know now, I would have demanded to go to a step-down unit. I would have demanded to have had a little bit more rehab and therapy. I think they took for granted because I was only 45 that I could handle this and just go home, but I couldn't. I went home. I ended up back in the hospital for pain control issues, but went home and started physical therapy right away until it was time to do cardiac rehab, and started mental health therapy right away. Very early on, I noticed I was having a lot of nightmares, a lot of water-related nightmares, a lot of vulnerability nightmares. And it was explained to me that I was suffering from PTSD. So I began cognitive behavioral therapy, and then moved into eventually EMDR therapy, which we do talk a lot about here at Aortic Hope. So these are all, again, part of the lessons I'm talking about. Nobody tells you after a dissection you might have emotional issues, physical issues with stamina, what have you. So I kind of learned all of this along the way, and found out a lot about this as being a disease from Facebook. One of the first 2 sites I went to was Survivors of Aortic Dissection and Aortic Dissection Support Group. Those are the 2 you're going to find when you type the words in. And the community members were incredible. There was a lot more information I was receiving in the community than I actually had when you're discharged from your doctor. And that leads to the next section of my life since my dissection, which was I realized really early on I was never going to be able to make it back to work. Missing 3 feet of my small intestine made it challenging to absorb my medication, so my blood pressure was never really at an ideal level in the beginning. Prior to that, I might also add, I had an aneurysm, but nobody felt it was important to discuss it with me and to share it with me. And we'll get back into that in a minute. But once I realized I couldn't go back to work, and I really took some time looking at the community, I personally always felt that there was something missing, that if I had met another survivor in clinic, someone had come to me and said, hey, I survived an aortic dissection, and look, I'm walking, I'm moving, I might have felt that my recovery could have been a little bit easier and quicker because I had somebody, a tangible person there to help me go through it. But that didn't exist. At least it didn't exist for me. And it was in 2016, right about this time, actually, leading into the very first aortic, at that time it was called Aortic Dissection Awareness Day, which was actually created by many people in the community. We're part of this concept and this day. I decided I wanted to plan something. And there was another woman in the community named Meg who also wanted to plan something. And she lived in Pittsburgh, and we decided to meet up. And we also decided, let's kind of create a page maybe that will have inspirational quotes. And Aortic Hope, the concept, the idea behind it was born. Through that, we met Jamie Barnhart, who is presently on our board. And she is a caregiver to Bill Barnhart and their daughter, Grace. They have Marfan syndrome. So in the 3 of us women talking to each other, we realized real quickly, I represented an aortic dissection survivor. Meg represented somebody who had an aortic aneurysm, very large, and she has BAV. That was discovered and fixed. And Jamie represented the caregiver. So we had all areas basically of aortic disease covered, and we decided let's really pursue this concept of aortic hope a little bit more intensely. So we formed this group that was going to be a little bit more than just inspirational quotes, and ideas were flying, and the first initiative of Hope Mail was born. And from there, we decided to bring additional people onto our board. And Aaron Greenberg, whose name you see out, was brought onto the board, as well as other individuals. And the idea of Aortic Hope becoming a nonprofit came to be. And we worked very, very hard to become a 501c3 by spring of 2018. So what started off as an idea of ways to meet other survivors has grown into us being a globally recognized post-diagnosis organization, a place where people can come and find that missing link, have the ability to feel a little bit of hope, some distraction, feel supported, have some additional awareness and education and research opportunities presented to them. And that's kind of what Aortic Hope has grown into be. So as somebody who's always worked since I was 14 years old, having my career ripped out from under me was another life-changing event. And I think what I've realized is I had to fix something. I had to pick something that I could do that would be involved in this community. And having Crohn's disease, I was heavily involved in that, but I knew I could not be between the two worlds. It would be too overwhelming. So Crohn's disease was very well covered by other organizations. I decided to put all of my eggs into the basket of the aortic community because honestly, in helping others, it really helps myself. Aortic Hope really works hard to connect, hearts one beat at a time, we say. And we make it our mission to not just survive, but we strive to thrive as well. And we all do this within the organization. And the people that work on the organization behind the scenes all have been touched by aortic disease in one way, shape, or another. So we feel this for you, with you, every single day. And through being part of Aortic Hope and having this myself, there was a lot of answers given to me, a lot of holes from my story, from my experience, a lot of lessons to be learned. And so I guess part of when I keep saying my story is more of a lesson is being an advocate for yourself is huge. And I'm realizing this is very big within the community. And one of the things I've learned since I've had my dissection is how do you know when it's time to go to an ER? How do you know? Every new ping and pang, and you stretch here, you turn there, something hurts. How do you know when it's time? So through having live events with cardiologists and surgeons, I've learned for myself and hopefully be able to share with you some guidelines on when it's appropriate, when it isn't, and when you wait and see. I've advocated for myself by forcing various tests to happen and strongly requesting that other tests not happen. I probably had at least 10 CAT scans within the first year. And I really fought hard to find out why I'm still having them and why I can't have MRAs instead in combination with an echo. And my surgeon now is very open to it. And that's the way we do things to save me a little bit of radiation. In addition to advocating and to asking a lot of questions and to being present in the community, I think that one of the other lessons coming out of this is, even though it's been almost 5 years for me, I can very easily be taken back to the day that it happened, and that's okay. We put up a picture, sometimes a quote that says, look how far you have to go, sure, but turn around and look behind you and look how far you've come. And we also talk about that the glass isn't necessarily half full or half empty. The point is it's refillable. And that is true, I think, for each of us, whether you're in a watch and wait situation or you've had a dissection. I'm in both right now. So while nobody told me I had an aneurysm before dissecting, I now have an aneurysm that's pretty big since dissecting. So I can feel the emotions that come from both sides of the coin. I know a connective tissue disorder, but I don't know what it is. So I kind of fall into that camp as well. I think a lot of people ask me how I stay so positive. And because you don't have a choice. Since my dissection, I initially came out with a frozen shoulder in my right arm. I've heard a lot of community members talk about having shoulder issues. I also ended up with the inside of my arm being a little numb from wherever they put whatever that line is called, right in your wrist. So that was numb. It still is. I also ended up in 2018 having a colostomy, something I feared more than this dissection, but it ended up being my saving grace because I went into remission afterwards. And I've had about 10 or 12 TIAs since 2017. I don't know. I can't believe I can even remember that. My brain is so shot. It's believe that maybe now it's being caused because of the aneurysm, but you know what? It doesn't really matter. It just matters that I stay on top of it, that I follow all the doctor's orders. And when I go to sleep and when I wake up tomorrow, with all of this that I go through, if you wake up, you just got to make the most of your day. And I think sometimes my days end up just being in my pajamas all day, working on stuff for Aortic Hope, watching mindless TV, whatever it might be. And some days I'm able to see some family members, but everybody has their own area of positivity that they're in. It's their own journey. And we've always said here that a journey with aortic disease ebbs and flows. There's always going to be times where you take a step back and you're more emotional and you're more conservative and you're more concerned and scared. And that's okay. That's what we're all here for. We're all supposed to be there for each other in those moments. And then there's going to be times where you're so joyful and you were able to walk a quarter of a mile or do a race like our ambassador, Carmen David, who has her Run for Aortic Health every year. And she's doing incredibly well. And we cheer each other on and we celebrate those achievements as well. So I think one of the most interesting things I've learned about this disease, like any disease, is we all have aortic disease, but we all present differently. And we all have nuances, additional comorbidities, and some of us don't, and that's great. But in having something that joins us together, it's interesting that we still can be individuals when it comes to this disease, and that's where the support of the community comes into. And I guess because of all of you, I find my strength in doing this and sharing my story with you, because it's not really about the tears that was shed when I said goodbye to my son. It's not about the pain that I felt when the chest tube came out. It's not about what really went down on the sofa when I felt the first pain in my neck. It's about being there for each other. And it's about understanding the differences and hearing things in each other's stories that we can take back and ask questions of our doctors, and learning and educating ourselves and never taking for granted our bodies and that we're going to be healthy all the time from this. You just enjoy that window of opportunity when it's there. So if anybody ever has a question about my story or wants to just talk, I'm always available. And I look forward to hearing more of your stories. I know it can be challenging and it can be overwhelming to share your story, but you really have no idea how therapeutically beneficial, if those are words that people put together, telling your story can be, and hearing someone's story can be, because it validates your own position where you are at that moment in time. And again, it's an educational event and gives us all moments to pause and have questions to take back and open a dialogue with a doctor. So not going to be too much more long-winded. I think I've shared enough. But again, if anybody has any questions, I'm always here and looking forward to always being there for all of you in the community. And I appreciate you taking time to listen to my story, and talk to you soon. Take care.